Hello listeners, my name is Cliff Ratza. I'm the author of two ongoing series of novels, the Lightning Brain series and its sequel, the Keepers series. And in addition to being an author and a writing coach, I teach at universities and have a consulting business. If you would like to learn more about me, my books, my writing coach activities, please contact Prime Solutions via lightningbrainseries.com website. Now, I try to make podcasts and videos that I think authors and writers and most people might enjoy listening to. My latest podcasts touch on topics connected to the Ukrainian invasion. Actually, it's a war. And I try to cover material that you might not see on the news or in YouTube or other videos. I figure that if I can't find a different point of view, there's no reason for me to add something that you can find elsewhere. And now to this podcast. Its title is Women in Politics. Females can be major players on the world stage. And I chose it because I find the Ukrainian women's ability to deal with existential threats awe-inspiring. And that piqued my curiosity regarding the role of women in politics. So I did a Google search to see what comes up. And here's a summary of what I find. And I'll start with the United States. First, there's Madeleine Albright. In 1977, she became the first woman to be Secretary of State and the highest-ranking woman ever in the U.S. government. She knew the importance of that work. Her Czech parents fled Nazi Germany in 1939, and she became a naturalized citizen while in college. But having been raised Catholic, it was only as an adult that she learned her family was Jewish and that many relatives had died in the Holocaust. She used her position to advocate for human rights, pushed NATO to intervene in Kosovo in 1999, and normalized U.S. relations with China and Vietnam, and became the first Secretary of State to travel to North Korea. Then there's Hillary Clinton. In 2016, she was the first woman nominated by a major party for President of the United States. A lawyer by training, during her husband Bill Clinton's time as president, she was the first lady to have an office in the West Wing. And while the health care reform plan was going on, she spearheaded much of the activities. She successfully worked with members of Congress on the creation of children's health insurance programs. And prior to her unsuccessful run for the White House, she was also the first woman to serve as a U.S. Senator from the state of New York, and served as Secretary of State in the Obama administration. Then there's Tammy Duckworth. Tammy Duckworth, previously a member of the U.S. House of Representatives from Illinois, came to the Senate after beating the state's incumbent senator, Republican Mark Kirk. In 2016, she served as an Army helicopter pilot during the Iraq War, where she lost both legs and injured her arm. As a member of Congress, she has parlayed her personal experience in advocacy for veterans by working on programs to help with PTSD and homelessness. And then there's Nancy Pelosi. The Bay Area Congresswoman became the highest-ranking elected female leader in the U.S. when she was elected Speaker of the House of Representatives in 2007. She helped push through President Obama's historic health care law, the law that raised fuel efficiency standards for cars and trucks for the first time in 32 years, and the first federal minimum wage increase in a decade. Then there's Condoleezza Rice. Serving in President George W. Bush's administration, she became the first African-American woman to serve as Secretary of State and National Security Advisor. She held the record for most miles traveled by a Secretary of State until John Kerry broke it in April of 2016. She got the White House to support nuclear negotiations with Iran and North Korea, and she was the first Secretary of State to go to Libya in over 50 years. Then there's Margaret Chase Smith. The Maine Republican was the first woman to win election in both houses of Congress and the first to be put forward as a presidential candidate at a national political convention in 1964, where she earned the support of 27 delegates but lost to Barry Goldwater. One of her best-known moments was her June 1, 1950 speech on the floor of the U.S. Senate, denouncing her colleague and Red Scare proponent, Joseph McCarthy. Her quote, "The American people are sick and tired of being afraid to speak their minds lest they be politically smeared as communists or fascists. Freedom of speech is not what it used to be in America. It has been so abused by some that it is not exercised by others." And the last I'll mention is Jean Kirkpatrick. She was an American diplomat and political scientist who played a major role in the foreign policy of the Ronald Reagan administration. An ardent anti-communist, she was a longtime Democrat who became a neoconservative and switched to the Republican Party in 1985. And now to women on the international political stage. Cleopatra is undoubtedly the first and most famous woman ever to occupy the political spotlight, but let's consider those of more recent vintage. We already know that Japan, China, and the Middle East countries practice gender inequality, but let's see what comes up when I search. Here's a sample of what comes up. Margaret Thatcher was Prime Minister of the United Kingdom from 1979 to 1990 and leader of the Conservative Party from 1975 to 1990. The longest-serving British Prime Minister of the 20th century. She was the first woman to hold that office. Then there's Indira Gandhi, an Indian politician and a central figure of the Indian National Congress. She was the third Prime Minister of India, was also the first, and to date, only female Prime Minister of India. Indira Gandhi was the daughter of Nehru, the first Prime Minister of India. Unfortunately, she was assassinated in 1984. Then there's Angela Merkel, Chancellor of Germany at one time. She garnered the full spotlight when she was named Time's Person of the Year. But her notable acts go beyond gracing a magazine cover. Despite strong opposition, she opened Germany's doors to migrants during the Syrian refugee crisis. And then there's Ellen Johnson Sirleaf. Sirleaf is the first female president elected in Africa. She began her political career in 1972 with a scathing message against the oppressive government, then went on to work at the Treasury Department and later became its Minister of Finance. Although she was put on a 30-year ban from politics, she ran for president, but lost to a political opponent accused of war crimes. She sent herself into exile for her own safety soon after. In 2006, she won the presidential election and was re-elected in 2011. She received a Nobel Peace Prize the same year. shared it with Lema Gbawi and Tawakkul Karman for their nonviolent struggle for the safety of women and for women's rights to full participation in peace-building work. And she comes from Liberia. Then there's Aung San Suu Kyi, State Councilor of Myanmar. Suu Kyi took on the role of opposition leader against Burmese dictator General Ne Win. Speaking out against him, she led a peaceful movement for democracy and human rights. She worked to spread democracy throughout Myanmar and founded the National League for Democracy. But in 1989, she was put on house arrest for 15 years to block her from communicating with the outside world. She received the Nobel Peace Prize in 1991 and was released from house arrest in 2010. Today, she continues to vie for democracy in her country. Then there's Helle Thorning-Schmidt, former Prime Minister of Denmark. Schmidt is the first female Prime Minister and leader of the Social Democrats in Denmark. During her term, she loosened the strict anti-immigration laws set forth by her predecessors. After stepping down, Schmidt took on the role of chief executive for the non-governmental organization Save the Children, which promotes children's rights in developing nations. And then there's Christine Lagarde from France. She's the managing director of International Monetary Fund, one of the most powerful women in the world. In fact, ranked number 6 by Forbes, French native Lagarde is a woman of many hats. She's credited as a lawyer, politician for the Union of a Popular Movement Party, and since 2011, the managing director of the International Monetary Fund. As the first woman to head the IMF, Lagarde is seeing the onset of a slight global upturn since the recent recession. And she's also helping the fund support female employment in order to avoid poverty and inequality. Then there's Christine Fernandez de Kirchner, former president of Argentina. Kirchner, endearingly nicknamed CFK, is the second female president of Argentina, but the first to get reelected. Her previous positions include national deputy and national senator for the South American country. And I heard an interview with Kaja Kallas, Prime Minister of Estonia, a couple of days ago. Her assessment of Russia versus NATO impressed me. Kaja Kallas is an Estonian politician and Prime Minister of Estonia since January of 2021. She's been the leader of the Reform Party since 2018 and a member of Riigikogu since 2019, and previously from 2011 to 2014. And what about women's role in Ukrainian politics? Well, here's a quote. Ukrainians' record on women's inclusion in politics is indefensible, said Tamra Martsenyuk, a Stanford University associate professor, also serving in the Department of Sociology and affiliated with the National University of Kiev. During the 20 years since Ukrainian independence, she says, women have held less than 10% of the seats in political office in Ukraine. Yet women constitute 45% of the management force in the civil service sector, albeit many at the local level. Gender discrimination against women in the political sphere and women's lack of access to power is prevalent in the Ukraine. Despite Ukraine's record as the first post-Soviet country to implement laws against human trafficking, domestic violence, and gender legislation, women are underrepresented in the political sphere. Ukraine continues to conduct international projects supporting gender equality. Yet, according to the World Economic Forum Global Gender Gap report, Ukraine places low on the list of countries promoting political and gender equality for women. According to Martsenyuk, very little is implemented either legislatively or programmatically in terms of tangible policies regarding women. There is a lack of government accountability and lack of sanctions for violation of legislation, she says. Stereotypes of gender roles play an important part in limiting women's participation in politics. There are 600 professions forbidden for women in Ukraine. And she reports that general public opinion in Ukraine supports the notion that women belong in a domestic environment, in the home raising children. According to the results of a Ukrainian public opinion survey, men are viewed as better suited for politics than most women. Martsenyuk speculated that the results of some surveys could be explained in part by the type of questions asked, which may have been formulated to solicit specific pro-male responses. Women in the Ukraine are eager to support the idea of stronger presence of women in political office, but the double burden of balancing domestic demands with working outside the home proves problematic for Ukrainian women. High-ranking officials have made public speeches in which women were called beautiful commodities to be seen, to inspire politicians, but not to hold public office. Recently, Ukraine's president delivered a speech encouraging foreign nationals to visit Ukraine excuse me, for purposes of viewing its beautiful women. Media and commercial advertisements contribute to the stereotype that Ukrainian women should be objectified as commodities, and in such an environment, observed Martsenyuk, it is hard to imagine other roles for women. Ukrainian political parties have differing attitudes regarding the inclusion of women in politics, especially the top levels of power. The differences can be studied by comparing party programs and party lists. The most popular Ukrainian political parties often lack female leaders and do not address key gender equality issues in their party programs. Yulia Tymoshenko is the most well-known Ukrainian woman politician and was listed third on Forbes' Most Powerful Women in 2005. She is an important figure to promote empowerment of women in Ukrainian politics, given that she is a self-made woman of power. Yet politicians in Ukraine use Tymoshenko's success as an argument against affirmative action laws that help women, asserting that her rise to power in the Ukrainian political arena precludes the need for special legislation. Okay, well, there you have it. Please search for additional information on women in politics if you wish. And that'll do it for this video. Thanks for listening. And budmos, or cheers, as Ukrainian men and women say.